quick turnaround from Friday. It's been a good trip. We took a good look at our last game. We're excited about this game coming up, obviously, for a variety of reasons. Always enjoyed coming to Nashville. And we're playing Mexico. And Mexico it has a lot of meaning in the history of U.S. soccer. But it's important, I think, for this group of players to step on the field and understand that when you play a team like Mexico, it's a team that they're likely to face when we start moving into the next calendar year and beyond. Always a good measuring stick whenever you play good opponents, and Mexico will be a good team. They're going to likely bring some new faces. We're likely to bring in some new faces. And once again, this will represent a great test for our young group, no question about it. And so we're excited. I know the players are excited. And it'll be a good test. Yeah, no, for sure. I think a few things that we talked about and hope to improve upon is you know, having the game a little bit more on our terms, and by that I mean in terms of a little bit more possession, a little more quality when we have the ball, a little more imagination and creativity when we get into good spots going forward. And so the balance of when we don't have the ball versus having the ball the other night against Brazil was a little tip, and we knew that. I thought defensively our shape and collective effort against Brazil was good, and I expect the same against Mexico. But I'd like to see us just be a little more useful with the ball, get into a little more advanced positions, and threaten a little bit more. Yeah, we are going to make changes for tomorrow. It's important that we get a look at some new faces, so you can expect 4 to 5 to maybe 6 changes in the starting lineup. And in terms of just the movement off the ball when we do look to step and apply pressure has to be a little more of a collective effort as opposed to individuals on their own, because what happens is now space opens up for teams that are good with the ball that can pick you apart a little bit. So I think, having watched the film, I thought in general sense we were pretty good, but I think that part can be improved. And this group's played enough together in a system that we've played where I think they understand the improvements that need to be made on that end. Well, listen, I mean, as far as playing Mexico, a lot of it does speak for itself. These are young guys that don't have the kind of background that I have with my experience playing Mexico. For me, it's always been kind of personal, the rivalry, and heated, and I don't mean it in a mean way. It's just that's the way it is. For that, a lot of these young guys, they don't have that experience yet, although many of them have played at the youth levels against Mexico, and we always say that Mexico, the USA-Mexico teams in our region are the standard. And so I think these players understand the significance. The reference to 9/11, I think I mentioned this before. You know, last week in New York, we had the opportunity to take the group down to the 9/11 memorial. It was very powerful. We all know the ages of these guys. Some of them were 1 year old, some weren't born, some were under the age of 6. But I think when they walked away from that, they had a greater understanding of the sacrifice that took place that day. And the game tomorrow on 9/11 will not be lost on the players.
Since the 80s and the 90s, several players have decided to play for the U.S. Instead Mexico, like since Martin Vasquez and a lot of them. But there's a few cases like Jonathan Gonzalez who decided the opposite, to play for Mexico. What do you think on this case, specifically on Jonathan Gonzalez, that he probably will face tomorrow the U.S. team after he played like 30 games in the youth level in the U.S.?
It's you know, that's a real individual decision. Every person has to make those important decisions, and Jonathan made his. And I don't think any more beyond that, to be honest. I think it's obviously, as you referenced, worked in the reverse cases for us as well. And as we move along, there's going to be probably more examples of that. So in the case of Jonathan, he made that choice. It was a personal decision that he had to make, and there's not much more to it in my mind. I think we'll be approaching this game and looking at personnel, and we'll look at Jonathan and evaluate him because he's on the other side now. So personal decisions, I respect that.
You mentioned making 4 to 6 changes in the lineup in this matchup. Is part of that going to be rotating some new players through the back line, especially without John Brooks in there, and having made no backline substitutions against Brazil?
Yeah, part of it is that. Part of it is that. I think, again, they're not changes because of disappointing play. This is the opportunity to make those changes, and there will be changes throughout the 11. Some will be in the back, some will be in other spots. But going into these 2 games, the idea was to try to offer opportunity for a number of guys, and so that's the plan going into tomorrow.
What do you need? What do you think that new coach or you will have to stay away from or stress tactically to make the U.S. the power that once was in the CONCACAF?
You know, it's a hard one to answer in one quick answer. I think what we've tried to establish with the group since November of last year is to offer them these opportunities to get good experience, to understand what sometimes the game asks of them when we play teams of high quality. We as coaches always want to do well with the ball and be creative, and so we want to try to build our teams where we have the right balance of defending and attacking. But beyond all that, I think one of the main things is getting our identity back in terms of each and every time we step on the field, what's a U.S. team going to look like? It's going to look like a team that's going to compete, that plays with no fear, that's aggressive, that's not afraid. And I think when we get beyond that into the tactics and systems, that'll all sort of be an organic process as we develop players. But the foundation of being a U.S. soccer team and what that brings each and every time is critical, and I think this young group has sort of established that.
Hi there, Dave.
Hi, Ian.
You just said there about getting the team's identity back. Why do you think that identity was lost in the first place?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't know if I phrased that properly. Okay. I think the hallmark of all the teams that I've been a part of, back from when I was first introduced with the senior team in 2000 and going through the World Cup in 2002 till fast forwarding now, I think my feeling is that there's always been this identity of a hardworking team that puts effort and understands what it means to be a part of the national team. I think with young players, that kind of has to sometimes be reintroduced in terms of making sure they understand when they come into a national team camp and put on the jersey. And more of it, Ian, is because of youth in some ways. So I don't think if you look at the past year or 2 or 5, you would say that the team didn't compete and play with heart. But I think with a young group, that needs to be reinforced each and every time we get together, and I think that's still an important component to what we're about.
A result really wasn't expected against Brazil, obviously. And then from what you've been saying here today, it doesn't sound like a result might be necessary tomorrow. How important is it to actually get a result tomorrow, and given the situation, 9/11, et cetera, and what would it mean to you personally with your history with the Derby to get a result?
Well, you referenced that maybe it's not important to get a result tomorrow based on what I've said. I don't know what triggered that in terms of making changes, perhaps. Making changes. To your point, going into the Brazil game, you're playing a team that's arguably could have won the World Cup and as good as any team on the planet. So the expectations were to really measure up and see how we handled when the game got fast, and took certain lessons from that. Now it's a fast turnaround in 3 days to play a heated rival in Mexico, where you're always measuring up, and it is important to get a result. It's always important to get a result, in my mind as the head coach, and I think the messaging with the players. So we never tell and talk to the group as like, well, it's a friendly, we want to get good experience. That's part of it, but getting results is very important. And with Mexico, it's very important because it becomes a little more personal. There's a real history. There's a real rivalry. That doesn't go away, even in friendlies, even in a calendar year where there's no Gold Cup or qualifying. So these players, I believe, understand that. They're certainly going to understand it in the next 48 hours. When we come away from it, we expect a good result.